Good morning. I'm Shona. I'm from Mindset in Motion, and I specialize in work-related stress. And I want to talk to you today about how to improve motivation in the workplace. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about my own situation and how I became involved in setting up my own business. And how I now help other people, and how I think I can also help businesses as well improve. So I'd say going back about 6 years ago, when the stigma around mental health was still, I would say, quite massive. And I had a small child. I was a lawyer, mainly specializing in employment law. So I think this is where a lot of my experience comes in as well, because I've seen it from both sides. So I have dealt with people who come to me because they're very often stressed at work and they've had to go through a grievance or disciplinary hearing with their employers for some, various different reasons. Or you even take a redundancy situation, for example. You might have an employee who's been with the company for 15, 20 years, loyal member of staff, and they're made redundant. And very often an employer will go through the procedural side of the redundancy. Wham bam, thank you, ma'am. We'll give you a payout. But there's very often no advice on what you do to go and find another job. And it can be soul destroying for that employee to, leave them to think, well, what on earth am I going to do now? I haven't been for an interview for 15, 20 years. How do I do it? How do I even start with my CV? And I've seen relationships, marriages end over this. And some of you watching this may think, well, why? They've just had a payout. Not all the time. If a company goes into administration, then they have to go through a long process to try and get some money out of the company. So it's not always that easy. But what I focus on is building that person's self-esteem again. I look at CV tips, and on my websites, on my blog page, you'll see every Thursday I'm actually doing a program at the moment where I look at particular CV tips on how you can rebuild your CV for all different types of scenarios. So if you're looking to change your career, if you're straight out of college or university, or if you don't have particular skills for a job you're going to, there's all different sorts of scenarios. So if you're stuck or you're in that situation, just have a look. It's actually quite useful. And I've used it myself as well, just for looking for updates, because, myself, I haven't had been for a new job for many years. So it's quite useful. And also in people in that situation, they may not have been for an interview for many years. And interviewers vary in their techniques. So some people will do what we call they will look at just your CV, or they will do a competency-based interview, and they will ask you to just on the spot think about a situation where you've had a conflict with another member of staff and how you've resolved it, or a situation where you've maybe had a disagreement with your boss, or you come across a difficult customer, and how you answer those questions is really important. So again, I offer training on how to do that as well with people, and it is actually really, really useful. So my own situation about 6 years ago, an employment law lawyer, I did work full time until I had my daughter, and then I came back to work, and during my maternity leave, I put in a request for flexible working. That was agreed, and I would work 28 hours a week. So my hours were, I think, something along the lines of a long day on a Monday, can't remember exactly, something like 9 till 6. And then on a Tuesday, I would finish at 4. I'd have a Wednesday off, and I was supposed to come in again, something like 9 on a Thursday and finish at 4, same again on a Friday. Didn't quite work like that. So did on a Monday, and on a Tuesday I'd finish at 4, but we'd find that our post wouldn't come down until about 4 o'clock. So I wouldn't know what work I'd have on a Tuesday. And anyone who's ever worked in employment law will know that it's incredibly fast paced. You will need to follow directions that you get in from an employment tribunal and literally need to have only a few days turnaround for some things. And you need to have, if you're not in the office, you either need to be able to access that work from home or check your emails, or have a line manager that is going to check that work when you're out of the office and either delegate it to somebody else, or make sure you're job sharing. It's a really hard job to do part-time, but that is something that was agreed. So wouldn't know what work I'd have on a Tuesday. We weren't allowed to work from home or check any work from home, and we weren't allowed to check any emails from home either. Obviously I wasn't in on a Wednesday, so I wouldn't get the opportunity to check any work on a Wednesday. So Thursday would come in, I'd come into the office and I'd have all my posts waiting for me on my desk. First thing I would do is check my emails, which would probably take the first hour of the day to check, because there would be probably at least 80. Sometimes one client may send at least 20 to me. And each email on that particular database we were using had to be logged separately. It was a bit of an archaic system. I'm not going to name the company. And you had to give a reason as well for each particular email. And that system was just mind-blowingly numb, and that was so slow as well. So spend the first couple of hours of that day logging all those emails, and you had to make sure they were done correctly. Then I would have to go through the post and decide what was urgent and what was not. And 90% of the time, most of it was urgent. So I knew I had to act on that work, pretty much all of that day. And that would include probably preparing a schedule of loss, taking witness statements, taking instructions from clients with regards to offers. And that would involve having to speak to third parties over the phone, like ACAS, discussing matters several times a day with my clients, speaking to the third-party solicitors. If we were wrapping up a case, that would possibly even take most of the day as well, because you're back and forth to ACAS, the solicitors, your client, trying to get an agreement. So, this wasn't a small, necessarily stuff which could be done very quickly. And on the other side of it as well, you'd have some clients, you can't deal with these particular clients on a call within a few minutes most of the time. Employment law can be a very sensitive area where, as I said, you might be dealing with somebody who's going through work-related stress. Now, putting myself in the shoes of other people, which I feel is one of my strengths, that person could be about to lose their career. And for them, they feel like they're losing everything. And I get that. I'm not just going to give them 10 minutes on the phone. I'm going to give them as much time as they need. So I might be on the phone sometimes for an hour with that person and listening to what that person needs to say. And, yes, I'm not a counsellor, or I wasn't a counsellor. Now I'm a performance and motivation coach, but even then, I was still somebody that they needed to trust, because they were the one who they were offloading on. They were trusting me with their case to take it potentially to a hearing or to resolve it for them, get the best outcome for them. So if I needed to spend an hour of my day on the phone to them, I would. But on that Thursday, I would come in, and by the time I'd got all my files out, they were literally, we're talking 6 foot, if not more, in height of files. And I wasn't leaving the office until at least 11 o'clock at night. And that was again on the Friday, excuse me. And I was expected to take on new cases as well. And then again, setting them up, taking new instructions from the client. And that would involve spending, again, quite a bit of time on the phone to the client and getting a statement, finding out then determining if they had a reasonable chance of success, etc. Then doing a draft letter to them, explaining how we work, etc., etc. And I managed that, sustained that for quite a while, but it got to a point where I wasn't seeing my daughter, I wasn't seeing my partner, now my husband, I wasn't seeing any friends, I was exhausted all weekend. And I went from having a job that I once loved and to a job which now, in the mornings before I went to work, I was being sick. I was coming home from work in tears every night. I was starting to have panic attacks, and I was starting to work through my lunch breaks, my normal, my morning, afternoon breaks, and because I just didn't have time. And then I found that I guess I wasn't really very productive. I wasn't eating properly because when I came home from work really late, I didn't want to have a meal like 11, half 11 at night. So my weight dropped. People were starting to comment that I looked gaunt. And that's not healthy. It's really not healthy. And at the same time, I had a boss, a line manager, who had been appointed whilst I was on maternity leave, who wasn't supportive at all. I tried speaking to him about it, but all he would do is say, you need to take on more cases. You've got targets to meet. If you don't meet these targets by the end of the year, then I'm going to have to put you on a performance improvement plan. So it was constant pressure. And I would find myself some days, especially more in the afternoon and towards the end of the week, reading a statement or a particular brief or something, and I would find myself reading over the same line 50 times and not taking anything in, and that would just panic me even more. And it got to a point after about 9 months when I was literally, my left side of the body just shut down on me, and my hands clawed into like a claw-like shape, like this. I had the most intense burning feeling in my feet. Everything just seized up. I actually thought I was having a heart attack because my chest was really, really tight. And every time I tried to breathe, this feeling in my chest would get even tighter. And I'm going to admit this, and this is quite embarrassing, but I don't mind talking about it now. I even lost control of my bowels. And that was just the most, well, anyone who's ever suffered from any form of mental health, it was just soul destroying. So at the time, I was staying at my sister-in-law's in Salcombe. The nearest hospital was in Derriford in Plymouth. So they called an ambulance, and all I wanted to do was just go to sleep. I didn't want to stay awake, but the the control center, whoever, were trying to talk to me and make me stay awake, and I was in absolute agony. So I got blue lighted to hospital. An hour later, I'm there, and a heart attack was ruled out, a stroke was ruled out. Nobody knew what was wrong. And eventually I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is similar condition to ME, if you've not heard of it, but is something which is, there's no cure for it. You can control it. And I do control it really well. But what I find is my trigger is extreme stress. And if I'm under extreme stress, I have what I call these little attacks. Now, well, they're not little. I would say over the last 6 years, sometimes they've got worse, sometimes they've eased off when I've taken myself out of stressful situations. I will explain my worst attack in a little while and what's happened since. But anyway, so I had to have 3 weeks off work, relaxed a bit, stayed at home. When I went back, I asked if I could do a secondment on our legal advice line, because I just couldn't sustain that form of pressure anymore. I knew there was something wrong. Our legal advice line was still on the same floor. And I did that. I was able to cover a maternity leave post for that 6 months. Knew I'd have to end up going back to the litigation team when at the end of that 6 months. So I loved it. It was very different. I didn't think it would be something I enjoyed, but I really enjoyed it. There was no pressure. At the end of my shift, I could go home. I didn't have to worry about coming into 80 emails the next day and a load of posts on my desk. I kind of missed doing the litigation work, but not to the extent of the work and not having to work till 11 o'clock at night. But I did like the variety of not knowing what type of legal work call I was going to get next. And I really enjoyed that, and I learned quite a lot actually in that 6 months. But during that time, I really felt like my line manager was out to get me. And there was one occasion where we had this clear desk policy. Being a legal department, we had this particular situation where if you left any confidential information out on your desk overnight and didn't lock it away in a drawer and then put your key in a safe, then you would potentially have disciplinary action against you. And we'd had emails sent round to that effect. So on a Monday evening, I would finish at 6. And I knew on this one particular Monday that I had locked my key in the safe and locked all the confidential information in my drawer beforehand. And I came into work at 8 o'clock on the Tuesday morning to find my key back in my drawer. Now, the only people who were still in the office at 6 o'clock when I was leaving was the line manager on the litigation department, who I'd had issues with, and one other person from the legal advice line who I got on very well with. So I thought, okay, either I'm losing my mind or somebody doesn't like me very much, which was upsetting. And the next thing I guess is a letter inviting me to a disciplinary hearing. Okay, so this is the first time, and I've been with this company for nearly 14 years, and I built up a lot of respect over that time, had a lot of responsibilities, and slowly, because of my mental health, and I'd been off for 3 weeks, all of these responsibilities were taken away from me, and I just thought it was incredibly unfair, but I didn't have any control. And I also, at that point, didn't have it in me to do anything. I didn't think about raising a grievance. I didn't feel well enough. I was still having panic attacks, but they'd eased off and my fibro was getting better since I'd been on the advice line. So I went to the disciplinary hearing and I was given a verbal warning and told if it happened again, then I was looking at a final written warning and possibly dismissal. So I was really careful. So the following time, Monday or the time after anyway, the person who I knew was staying back late at 6 o'clock on the Monday, I actually got them to witness me putting my key in the safe, and we videoed it with my phone. And the only other person left in the office when I was leaving was my line manager from the litigation department. Woe betide, I come in at 8 o'clock on the Tuesday morning to find my key back in my drawer, which I definitely hadn't left there the night before. So I waited for the disciplinary letter, which came the next day. And I thought, you know what, bring it on. So I went to the disciplinary hearing, and at the disciplinary hearing, I produced a witness statement from the person who had witnessed me putting my key in the safe and locking it away. And I also produced the video evidence. And I also said, and there was also proof, that the only person left in the office was my line manager. And at that stage, I did raise a grievance, a formal grievance. And all they did, they upheld the grievance in my favour, because they couldn't really not. And all they said, because at this stage as well, we were coming to the end of my 6 months secondment, was that they were going to send him on a management improvement course. And when he was finished with that, then we should attend some form of mediation together. And they were happy that we would be able to work together again. And I was like, absolutely not. He's clearly out to get me. He wants to try and destroy my career. The damage has been done. I could not work with this person again. I should have probably pursued it further, but I was just in a really bad place at that time. And I decided to leave. I left a job I'd once loved for 14 years. And I handed in my notice. I took a 10 grand drop in salary, and I did a different job for 2.5 years, closer to home. Not even really legal work. I went more into the management side, which I actually quite enjoyed, funnily enough. But yeah, that was that part. And if I think about it, maybe that was when I should have decided to have stayed in the job that I then got, because within a very short period of time I got promoted and I was back on the same salary as I was earning as a lawyer. And I loved the people I worked with. It was a small business. But then I got headhunted by my next company. And I've got to be honest, it was back in the centre of Bristol. I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do. Again, I'm not going to name any names of companies here at all, because I for libel, slander and libel reasons. But I decided after a while that I would accept the position, because it was a job that I'd always wanted to do. Going back to when I first did my degree, I could always see myself doing this particular area of law. And it was several different areas, all my field of specialism. First few months in the job, brilliant, absolutely loved it. And I won Employee of the Quarter award. I was getting nominated for the different awards all the time. I got magnums of vintage champagne, and it was great. Finally, my confidence was starting to come back, and it'd taken a long time. And I felt worthy, I felt respected, and I thought, great, I'm back. I can do this job. I think I'd gone from thinking I was, and I hate to use the word failure, but that is how I felt. But I didn't feel like that anymore. 9 months into the job, I was cycling to work from where I live in Portishead. And I unfortunately had an extremely serious cycling accident. And that was when my life, I would say, started to really change. And it's not a negative thing. I now see it as a really positive thing, because I was given a 20% chance of survival when I had that accident. I was wearing a helmet, but I don't really remember a huge amount about the accident myself. All I do remember was I was cycling down a main road in Bristol, and I was about to come onto the cycle path. And where you have those bumpy tiles for blind people to be able to work out, where the crossing is, I was coming onto those. It was a slightly wet day, and I was used to cycling in all weathers anyway. But my front wheel came out from under me, and from what I gather, I went over the handlebars, and my face took the brunt of the impact, and I ended up breaking all of my orbital bones all around my eye socket, smashing or shattering completely my cheekbone, and breaking my jaw. And I also had a small fracture to the base of my skull, and I broke some fingers as well. So hey, on the positive side, I got a free facelift on the NHS in my mid-40s, so it's all good stuff. But I now have a face full of titanium plates and pins. Ooh. And everyone says, wow, you can't tell, you can't tell, but I was left deaf in my left ear for over a year until I had my sinus cavity all flushed out, and that was not very pleasant. I've still got problems here in my sinus area, which has recently been discovered, and I've got to possibly have a biopsy to check if something more serious, and then maybe have all that drained out, which is not going to be very pleasant, and will have to be done under general anaesthetic. But after the previous surgery I had, where they had to cut from ear to ear, and well, I won't give you all the graphic details, but I looked like Mr. Bump with a drain sticking out my head after the surgery. I had to have about 4.5, 5 months off work. My physical recoveries, I think, because I'm generally quite fit and healthy, I recovered relatively quickly. And, as a result of that, I saw occupational health, and, I was able to return to work on reduced hours and then slowly build them up over a period of time. Relatively soon. I'd never experienced any kind of injuries like that before, so I had no idea what to expect. I was told by various consultants and doctors not to expect to even start to feel normal again for at least 2 years post-accident. I was unconscious for 20 minutes after the accident, so there was always going to be what they call post-concussion syndrome, which could come on at any stage. And what we hadn't realised at that point was for the full 5 months that I'd been off, I was literally resting. I hadn't had to use my brain for anything at all, really, apart from I'd learned to play the guitar because I couldn't do much else, but that was something I learned slowly and quite enjoyed. But when I came back to work, I slowly realised that there were little things that I couldn't do, which I could do before the accident. I'd always been really good at multitasking. I couldn't seem to do that anymore. And because I was deaf in my left ear and we worked in an open plan office, I was really, really struggling. I had an earpiece provided after a few weeks when I went back. And it was not as loud as your normal telephone or over the headpiece, and I couldn't wear an over a head one because of all the scars which were left around here, and it was far too painful to wear a headset all day. And I was really struggling to hear people when they were talking to me on the phone, and my job was mainly phone based, taking legal advice and giving people advice, and people would be talking to me and I'd have people talking all around me, and I'd spend more time concentrating on what the person was trying to say to me than listening to what advice they wanted. And I'd find myself repeating and asking them if they could repeat what they just said. And one person even said, "My goodness, are you stupid?" And I actually said, "No, actually, I'm partially deaf." But my line manager, I felt history repeating itself, because my line manager would listen to my calls and say, "Well, I have no problem hearing what the person said." And I thought, can you not put yourself in my shoes? I've got people around me. I was sat on the closest desk to our canteen area, so I had noise there. And it wasn't until a few months after when I saw a consultant neuropsychiatrist, and she diagnosed me with episodic depression as a result of my accident and then the pressure I was under at work. There were quite a few other things going on at work as well, which just added to it. Like my hours were longer, and I was really struggling with the traveling into work because of pressure in my sinus area, and it was just hard. And during the same week that I was diagnosed with episodic depression and waiting for the report to come into work, or I thought occupational health, we'd had it was Mental Health Awareness Week, and we'd had this big talk at work from a guest speaker who was really inspirational. And he spoke about how he'd suffered from mental health for many years, and he tried to take his own life. And now he turned his life around, and he was so, he was great now. He was still good. He still struggles sometimes, but now he does all this inspirational speaking and how people can recover, etc. But how there's still a stigma around mental health. And all of the senior executives at my company, which I worked for, they all signed this pledge to say that if there was any member of staff suffering from any form of mental health, then they would help them. They would make sure that they got the help they needed, the support they needed, whether that was external. There were all these helplines that you could call, etc., etc. So the report came in, and the report went to my line manager, and she called me in for a meeting. And the first thing she said was, "I have a concern. In addition to your really bad physical injuries, which were pretty much recovered, you've now been diagnosed with episodic depression. And I'll just add as well, so anyone out there who's suffering from any form of mental health, episodic depression is different to depression. Episodic depression is as a result of some form of trauma. And I think having what I've been through, it was probably not that much of a surprise. Anyhow, so she says that she's concerned. And I was like, right. And they basically gave me 3 options. And this was without inviting me to a meeting, a formal meeting. This was meant to have been a catch-up meeting. So I couldn't take anyone with me. There was no one from HR there. And she wasn't medically qualified either, may I add. So, she had no rights or backup to be able to form this diagnosis herself. And I was also booked in to see a neuropsychologist, which is different to a neuropsychiatrist, later on in the summer, because that's how long the waiting list is, to actually have some cognitive testing done, where they then determine the extent of your cognitive issues, because I was having problems with concentration and memory. And really, they should have been waiting for this report until any further action was taken. But no, they weren't going to do that. So my line manager said, we're either going to put you on a performance improvement plan until you're better. You either take an unpaid sabbatical until you're better, or you leave the company. Now, by this point, I'd been there for over 2 years. So I knew that, one, I was likely to be covered under the Equality Act anyway, because I had a disability. But I knew they couldn't do that. So I kind of went home that day and just thought, wow, okay, I'm a bit stunned. And I just thought, God, I'm seeing history repeat itself here. I've had an accident and I'm being treated really unfairly here. It wasn't my fault I had an accident. And all my line manager would say as well is, oh, we just want the old Shona back. Well, don't you think I do? At first I felt really guilty that I'd had an accident on my way into work, but I didn't want that to happen. So I went to the doctor the next day and I was in bits at the doctor's, and anyway, they signed me off for work-related stress. And when I did eventually see the neuropsychologist, it did confirm that I did have cognitive issues. I was struggling with my memory and concentration, and because of the type of work that I do or did, it was only just reinforced by the fact that I have to think a lot. I needed more regular breaks. I should be allowed to work from home. None of these things were considered. Maybe even reduced hours. And the report did go to my employers in the end, but I decided to bring a formal grievance because I just thought this was not fair. But in the meantime, I decided to get myself a life coach. And that was probably one of the best things I'd done. I'd also, as well, after my accident, started to practice mindfulness, which teaches you to be really in tune with your inner self and stop letting your mind go out of control and drifting away, which is, I was struggling with my sleep, and that really helped to bring myself back into balance. So I decided to go and get myself a diploma in mindfulness, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I also, as well, with help from my life coach and the suggestion of my life coach, got myself a diploma in life coaching, and also NLP, which is neuro-linguistic practitioning. And I'm now helping people who are going through work-related stress. I call myself a motivation and performance coach. And for me, I think it's really important because, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, there are so many people out there who are going through the same sort of things. I get it. And not only do I have the employment law experience, but I've also been through this now twice. And I've been able to turn it around. I'm so positive now. One of the biggest things I've learned is, look, the past is in the past, okay? stop dwelling on that. I used to see myself as a victim and think, oh, why me? Why has this happened? I don't anymore. I now actually think that that accident had to happen in order for me to have that wake up call to think, oh, wow, I've got to do something with my life. And this is really what I think I've got to do. I love helping people. And just by taking them from that zero to hero and redoing their CVs for them, helping them with interview techniques, listening to them, having that empathy and being able to put myself in their shoes is massive. The other thing as well is what I'm doing is motivational talks in the workplace, helping businesses as well with things like exit interviews. A lot of companies, in the past, a lot of companies used to do this. Not so many do now. So when it comes to staff turnover, a member of staff will leave and that's it. I think looking at reasons behind why people leave is quite a big factor. And I find as well that more employees are prepared to talk to somebody external like myself, because they then feel like they can open up a little bit more. So then I look at the patterns around that and then look at possible training areas on that. So if it is because of maybe stress in the workplace, then I will put in suggestions to the employer on maybe how they can change their working environment. And there are ways to do this. There's quite a lot of ways. And I'm just going to quickly, just to wrap up, go through a few ways that businesses can do this, okay? And ultimately, you might think, first of all, when I go through these, that, well, that's just going to slow down production. It doesn't, okay? It increases it. And I will show you how you can do this. By providing training on how to improve performance in the workplace, it ultimately improves your targets, motivation, confidence, staff turnover, an improvement in mental health, sickness, and then morale as well. So the first thing I would say is, to any employer out there, recognizing your employees' good work. I find employee motivation is increased if their hard work is recognized. Now, how you recognize your team's work contributions can have a huge impact on staff morale. That doesn't have to be a staff bonus at the end of the year, all right? If you're a big company and that's something you do anyway, then yeah, great. But actually treating an employee as a valued member of the team can be of huge importance. That's sometimes all an employee needs. Second one is setting small measurable goals. So if you set visible goals, then that can make them seem realistic and more achievable. So it can also be a clear indicator that an employee's work is making a difference as well. So each time a goal then is conquered, that provides a real boost of motivation. And as an employer, you can celebrate those achievements by recognizing that employee in some way. So again, it only has to be small. If you have like these yearly targets, so you set something, so by the end of December, every member of staff has to, if you work in a legal firm, has to open 80 new cases. Well, that's the same for everyone. If you had smaller goals that had something to do by the end of each month, then that's something each month that somebody has to work towards, okay? Applauding results. So part of what makes setting small and measurable goals so important is that it provides plenty of opportunities to applaud the results of your team's hard work. That doesn't mean you need to give a standing ovation to every employee who made it to work on time, right? But it is crucial to let everyone know how much each of their contributions moves the business forward. Then I think as well, just staying positive. When it comes to that monthly one-to-one, most people, and you can ask any member of staff this, right? When it comes to the monthly one-to-one, the employee should actually look forward to it and not dread it. Now, Nobody likes having a conversation about how poorly they've done. Now, it's true that expecting nothing but rainbows and sunshine all day is a bit unrealistic, but even those of us with thick skin have a tolerance threshold for negativity. So instead of telling a teammate when they went wrong, focus on the things they did right. And that's something that I find. I've worked for a lot of companies, and I've got to be honest, even when I've made a note of things that I've done well, and we were always told to do this, make a note of like something you've done well. Every single one-to-one I've probably ever sat in, all I've ever found is that line managers focus on the negative things. Turn it around. It's not that hard. Happiness and positivity play a greater role in the success of your business than you can imagine. That will ultimately improve motivation, engagement, and productivity. It really works. Please just try it. I'm not saying that if a member of staff buggers up all the time and they're constantly coming into work late and their spelling is awful on emails, I'm not saying that you can't bring that up, but don't forget just to make some positive comments as well. Staying fueled. You might think, well, what does that mean? Right. It's hard to stay focused and driven when you're low on fuel, right? That's why it's so important for everyone to stay fed. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it's common for employees to become so engrossed in their work that they either forget to or forgo to even eat breakfast, lunch. That's not great for their health. And even worse, I think I was mentioning earlier on about myself in my previous job. It's even worse for productivity. Now, an employer can keep healthy snacks around the workplace to help the team maintain energy levels throughout the day. And the cost of providing that for the team is likely to be offset by the team's increased productivity. My company, they would get fruit in a few times a week. And that was always a nice little perk to the job. Just little things like that. And I'm not saying go and do a cake run. That's not healthy, okay? They should really be healthy snacks. Going back as well to my earlier point, take regular breaks. You can't expect to maintain workplace motivation when everyone's burnt out. That's why it's so important to take regular breaks. Stepping back and taking a moment to refresh and recalibrate isn't just helpful in staying motivated, it's important to your health. Also, sitting all day isn't good for you, and neither is working non-stop. So taking even a 5-minute break every hour or two can have a positive effect on your mind and body. And again, on the same point as well, just staying healthy. Nothing is worse than when an employee forces themselves to come into work when they're sick and gets everyone else sick. So they probably won't be very productive anyway. And I think a lot of employees will do that because of the company's sickness policy. So again, I would make sure that the policies you're setting aren't keeping people from taking the time that they need to stay healthy. Think about the way you approach time off and the medical benefits. Disengagements cost company across the world millions of pounds each year. And a generous time off policy might seem expensive at face value, but actually save the company a lot of money in lost productivity, poor attendance and engagement. On that staying healthy point as well, one of my biggest things, maybe this is because I'm quite into health and fitness and well-being. I used to get so annoyed and frustrated with employees who would moan about putting on weight. This is mainly for office-based people, I would say, okay, who would eat fattening food. We'd have a kebab van outside the office. They'd eat that every day. Why don't you just treat yourself once a week to something like that? First of all, have a day a week where you do that. Secondly, we would work on one, we had an office on the first floor and the fourth floor of our building, and people would even get the lift to the first floor. I worked there for 2.5 years and never once got the lift, and I worked on the 4th floor. So I provided some stats, and I got a poster and I put it next to the lift where the stairs were also next to the lift. And I said, why are you using the stairs today? Why are you using the lift today? Why don't you consider using the stairs? It's actually proven that using the stairs for 2 minutes a day, it burns off more calories than jogging for 10 minutes a day. And that's actually a fact. And if you've got a Fitbit or a similar exercise little device, a steps tracker, you can do little competitions with your work colleagues. So you could have like a weekly challenge where you see how many steps you can do. To make sure you're doing like 250 steps an hour. If you've got a headset, you can even stand up and do your calls and walk around a little bit, so you're not stuck, sat down. Lunchtimes, don't just sit at your desk and surf the internet and look and do some shopping. Go for a walk, even if that's only half of your lunch break. We used to work next door to a lovely big park area, and you'd feel so much better if you just got out, got some fresh air, and then come back into the office. Any time of the year, I would do that. If you got the bus into the office, think about maybe getting off a stop earlier. Instead of the stop, which drops you off right outside the office, and then you're in the office, people get the lift, and then they're sat down all day. So people who tell me they don't have a chance or time to go to a gym or they can't afford it, think about just those little simple things that you can do just to make those little changes every day. Okay, they're not that hard. Moving on. If for an employer, again, see and share the big picture. So what I mean there is a large part of understanding the purpose behind your work is seeing how it fits into the larger picture. And you can help boost motivation in the workplace by ensuring your team understands how each of their efforts impacts the larger goals of your organization. So seeing how the team's work help the company grow can provide a huge amount of motivation in the workplace. So just think about sharing that information. It doesn't have to be every week, but maybe have maybe a monthly huddle meeting, and just let the company know about that information. Provide a sense of security. Employees want to feel they still have a place to work. So psychological theory suggests that there is a hierarchy of basic needs that people require before they can be motivated to reach their full potential. So security falls right beneath psychological needs like food and water. So once employees feel secure, they're more likely to be motivated to reach and further stretch their potential. So think about that one as well. These days, because of the situation we're in, most people get, a 6-month fixed term contract or just a temporary contract. Maybe just try and see if there's any further security you can offer, or as soon as you know that person's passed their probation, for example, if you're able to give them a little bit more security, just be honest with them. Now, having some fun. I put this in here because I feel like there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of fun in the workplace. It's okay having a team that feels like, sorry, I was going to say it's not okay. It's not okay to have a team that feels like every day is a slog. I mean, I know people who get timed when they go for a toilet break. I mean, come on. I know there's stats. Everyone wants the best productivity out of their employees, but they're adults. Don't treat them like they're still in school. I mean, does that really need to still happen? I'm not saying you need to put a snooker table in the office to make work fun, but just find little bits of fun in everyday activities and focus on what makes working in your organization great. And you and your team will be amazed at how motivating a little bit of fun can be. And it just makes the team gel as well. I think is so important. Now, my final bit, and this is something that I offer in workplaces as well, because I am a master mindfulness practitioner. It's becoming very common in workplaces now, and it's to practice and promote mindfulness. Now, as I said, I provide mindfulness workshops, and this takes place over a 6-week period in a group environment of up to 20 people. I don't have more than 20 people in my groups because I like to keep them quite small. Now, this takes place over about 30 to 45 minutes, and usually in a lunch hour, so it doesn't interrupt the working day, really. And it's an introduction to mindfulness. And I basically spend each week going through starting off the basics of mindfulness, and then I practice some exercises with each member of staff. And it's really good, because what you will find is this benefits employees. It makes them more productive. It helps reduce stress. It can stop people having to take time off sick if they're more in control of their emotions, their feelings. And the benefits around this now are phenomenal. Now, it's becoming very popular in the workplace, and this form of treatment can be very successful if practiced regularly. And I can teach employees and managers on how to do this properly. So, if anyone's watching this and this is something that you want to consider, then just please contact me. My website is www.mindset-in-motion.co.uk. I have blogs on this, and I'd love to hear from you. So that's my talk today. I'd love to hear from anyone with any feedback. If there's anybody out there who is listening to this and can relate to what I've spoken to today and wants to speak to me in confidence, I don't just see people face to face. I can see people via FaceTime, WhatsApp, any form like that as well. So, if you're struggling, my first consultation is always free anyway. So we don't have to go to each other's houses or anything like that. If you don't live in sort of the Bristol, North Somerset area, don't worry. But I just want to help as well to reduce the stigma around mental health. The one thing that I found, and what came out of my recent grievance, was that it's fine to put up these posters, get speakers in about mental health and the importance of it. But unless the people in charge, so the line managers and the senior managers, are trained and understand it, then there is absolutely no bloody point, excuse my language. And something that my company have decided to do now is put a program in place to make sure that all the managers are trained and have specialist training to on what to do if a member of staff is suffering from mental health. And how to approach it, and not to ask inquisitive questions to that employee, because it just makes them worse. And certainly not to form their own diagnosis either. That can only be done by a medical professional, and not somebody who's not a medical professional. So, if anything, something's come out of that, but we'll see. It's in its infancy at the moment. So please take something from this, and it's been really, really great to share my experience with you and what I can hopefully do to help out in the future. All right, thank you very much. Bye-bye.